This happened to me because I had been blind my entire life. Don't be like me. Open your eyes before it's too late. Try to imagine that one morning your legs simply decide that you are no longer the master in your own home. You wake up in your bedroom in Alabama. You see the familiar oaks through the window. You hear the kettle boiling in the kitchen. But below your waist there is a desert. Dead silence. That is exactly how at 70 years old I moved into this wheelchair, and that was the first time in my life I was truly afraid. Not afraid that I wouldn't be able to walk, no. I was afraid that now I was completely in the hands of the people I had spent my whole life trying to bend to my will. I expected revenge from them, cold indifference, or at least the same harsh accounts I had presented to them for decades. But what happened instead tore my world apart more than any illness ever could. I am 84, and for 60 years I ruled people as if they were parts on an assembly line or soldiers in formation. I believed I had the right to do so because I worked harder than anyone, built this house, paid for college, and never allowed myself any weakness. In our South, a man is taught to be a rock, not a human being. I demanded perfection from my sons and unquestioning obedience from my wife, considering it the highest form of love and care for their future. I saw the world as a battlefield where any display of tenderness was a breach in the defense. But sitting here, strapped to this metal frame for 14 years now, I understood the main pattern. I built a fortress, but what I actually built was a solitary cell. All my experience, all my rules turned out to be a screen that hid the most important thing from me, how the hearts of those beside me truly beat. I was a blind tyrant in my own paradise, and the price of that blindness turned out to be far higher than the loss of my ability to walk. This blindness showed itself in patterns that I considered for years to be the foundation of a real man. In Alabama, we are taught that a family is a fortress, and you are its chief engineer. I built that fortress out of concrete and iron, forgetting that the people inside needed to breathe. The first pattern I failed to see, the fear you sow, does not necessarily grow into hatred. Sometimes it turns your loved ones into shadows who are simply waiting for you to fall silent. I saw my eldest son, Tom, trying to paint when he was 10. In our South, manual work is valued, but in a different sense. Instead of praising his brushstrokes, I took the brushes away and said that in this family, men hold tools, not toys. I saw the tears in his eyes, but I considered it my victory. I was burning out weakness from him. Now, when he comes into my room every evening to transfer my helpless body from the chair to the bed, he does it with such care as if I were the most fragile thing in the world. He doesn't throw those confiscated brushes in my face. His silent, almost professional care strikes harder than any reproach. This is the slow consequence of my rightness. I received care, but I lost a son friend, leaving myself only with a son orderly. Then there was my daughter, Sarah. I controlled her every step because Father knows best. I saw how she withdrew, how the fire in her eyes faded after each of my lectures about stability. I did it again and again, believing my strictness was my duty. Now she comes to see me every day, brings peaches, and reads the newspapers, though I can see how tired she is. She never mentions how I forbade her from going away to study. She simply holds my aged hand, and in those moments I feel how every one of her kind acts exposes my former worthlessness. I see how she learned to be merciful despite my upbringing, not because of it. But the hardest pattern is Mary. For 50 years she was my shadow. I took her care for granted like the southern heat in July. I remember when she was 60 and bought herself a bright dress just to feel alive. I looked at her with my master's gaze and said that at her age she should think about dignity, not the color of fabric. She didn't argue, she simply went and took it off, and I never saw her in color again. Now that I am bound to this chair, it is she who lifts me every night to turn me onto my other side because my body goes numb to the point of screaming. Her back has long been bent, but she never complains. She looks at me with the same eyes she had in that dress, and in that gaze there is no malice, only an endless ocean of forgiveness I did not deserve. I watch her spend her last strength caring for a husband who for half a century treated her like convenient furniture. The social norms of our region taught me to be the master of the house, but they did not teach me to be a human being in the heart of my own wife. Every warm compress she places on my cold feet is a reminder of how many years I was truly blind. The most frightening thing about my blindness was that I considered it my strength, my armor against the world, until life began to strip that armor from me layer by layer until it left me completely naked before the truth. 4 years ago, I lost my younger brother, Elijah. He was my complete opposite, a gentle, cheerful man who could listen for hours to someone's stories about a failed harvest or feed every stray dog in the county. All my life, I looked at him with that hidden superiority we successful people feel toward the weak. I considered him a failure because he did not build great wealth and did not keep his family in an iron fist the way I did. But when he was dying in that old hospital in Montgomery, the air in his room was filled with something I had never felt in my own home. There were so many people by his bed that the nurses couldn't bring in chairs fast enough. Friends, former colleagues, neighbors, they came not just to say goodbye, they came to warm themselves one last time by his light. His grandchildren cried, clinging to his thin arms, and in those tears there was no fear of death, only boundless love for the man who had always heard them. And I sat in my chair in the hallway, gripping the armrests until my knuckles turned white, and for the first time in my life I felt that icy draft of emptiness. I realized that if I disappeared tomorrow, people would come to me out of duty, like to a monument that had finally stopped demanding attention. It was not just grief, it was despair from realizing that I had lived my life building walls where my brother planted gardens. This contrast burns my heart every time I see my children talking to each other in the next room. I see their silhouettes through the half-open door, hear their muted laughter. But as soon as they come into my room, their faces become serious, proper. They discuss my medication, my schedule, my whims with such professional detachment, as if I were an old broken clock they are obliged to wind every morning. I taught them this myself. I taught them to be efficient, not compassionate. I taught them that emotions are trash that interfere with business, that a man in Alabama must be hard as the red clay beneath our feet. Now I receive the fruits of my labor, perfect care without a drop of warmth. And it hurts more than any illness. When Sarah touches my forehead to check my temperature, her fingers are gentle, but her hand is cold as marble. She does everything right. She is a flawless daughter, but she is not doing it for me. She is doing it for her conscience, because I raised her to be proper. I look at her tired shoulders and want to shout, "Forgive me! Forgive me for every word with which I killed your dream, for every evening when you wanted a hug and received only my demands." But the words get stuck in my throat because I am afraid they will sound too late and only add to her burden. I see how she has changed. She learned to forgive. She rose above my petty strictness. And I remained the same, only now I am weak and dependent. I often recall evenings on our porch 30 or 40 years ago, when the air smelled of honeysuckle and the children were still small. Back then I could have simply sat next to them on the steps, asked about their little fears, spoken about my own doubts, shown them that a father is also a human being. But I chose to remain silent or to criticize. I chose to be that rock against which they shattered their hopes and sincerity. Now, as time washes away my memories the way a flood erodes the banks of the Alabama River, I see the same image again and again. Mary's face the night I first couldn't stand up on my own. There was no triumph or malicious "I told you so" in her eyes. There was only the deep, bottomless fatigue of a woman who had waited her whole life for a word of love, for a drop of tenderness, and instead received a paralyzed tyrant whose bedpan now had to be emptied. This inner reflection comes too late, when my voice has grown weak and my eyes are often blurred by an unwelcome tear. I look at the younger generation, at my grandchildren, and I see in them the same detachment I once sowed in their parents. It is like a virus I brought into this house, and now it lives in every generation. I see how my grandson looks at his father with the same wariness Tom once looked at me. And that is my greatest punishment, to see how my mistakes continue to live even when I can no longer move a finger. Time in our state flows slowly, and just as slowly it reaches me that a man's true wealth is not a house or a bank account, but the number of people who want to touch your hand simply because you exist. I was always just a shadow that blocked their sun. Now, as the sun sets over the hills of Alabama, leaving long shadows across the floor of my room, I simply sit here and listen. I listen to the clinking of dishes in the kitchen. That's Mary and Sarah preparing dinner. I listen to Tom fixing something in the garage, quietly whistling an old tune. These sounds are the music of life that I ignored for decades, considering them mere background noise for my grand plans. I was too busy being in charge to notice how quickly time passes when you look only at the goal and not at the people beside you. You know, old age in a wheelchair is not only about the frailty of the body, it is about the astonishing opportunity to finally fall silent and hear the truth. All my life I thought I was leading my family toward the light, but in reality, I was simply blocking their view with my broad back. I was afraid of appearing weak, afraid that if I showed even a bit of tenderness, my authority would crumble like dry sand. And it turned out that the only thing that truly holds this house together is that very softness and patience I considered flaws. My family cares for me not because I raised them in strictness, but because they turned out to be better than me. They found within themselves the strength to love someone who did not know how to love. I do not want to give you advice, because after everything I have done, I have no right to do so. I just want you to look at your hands right now. Can you move them? Can you stand up and hug your wife or your son without waiting for them to approach you with pills or a blanket? If so, you are the richest person in the world. Do not wait until you are 70 to realize that your rightness is worth nothing if silence reigns in your home out of fear rather than peace. Open your eyes now while you can still walk this path on your own feet. I look at my motionless knees and understand. I received exactly the life I built. But I am grateful to God for this paralysis, because without it, I would have died believing myself a great man while remaining completely empty. My blindness has passed, but the price for that sight turned out to be too high. Now I am simply Harry, an old man learning to be grateful for every sip of water from the hands of those I once failed to appreciate. Tell me, was all that iron discipline worth even a single minute of the sincere love I lost over these years? If this conversation of an old man from Alabama resonated even a little in your heart, I would be grateful if you let me know with your like. It will let me feel that my mistakes at least helped someone become wiser. And subscribe to this channel if you would like to sometimes come onto my porch for such an honest conversation. There will always be room here for those who seek the truth.